I'm still really happy with this upgrade, and I think this is going to last me for quite a few years. I'll see you in the next video in 2026. I think most 6-month reviews of this type are just some guy pulling this phone out of a drawer, and the last time he touched it was 6 months ago for the first review. And I don't think that is a very valuable review. So I'm way too poor for that shit. I have been using this phone as my daily driver for the last 6 months, ever since it released in early February. And now that the honeymoon is over with this phone, the big question is the OnePlus 12 still worth your time and money? Let's find out. Just a reminder, OnePlus doesn't pay me anything, and I've never been sponsored by anything. But in the description, there are affiliate links for some of the products that I'm talking about today. So if you choose to purchase through those links, I might see $1 or $2 of that, and I appreciate it. First off, design and build. I think the OnePlus 12 design is pretty divisive. It's pretty large compared to the phones that it competes with. I would prefer a smaller flagship phone, but I apparently do not reflect market tastes because you don't see many of those anymore. The Zen phone isn't even doing that these days. The phone is also really slippery. This back finish is nice and it feels really good to the touch, but it's slippery. That said, no matter how slippery it is, you're probably keeping this phone in a case. I certainly do. I use a Nilkin MagSafe case. I think I reviewed that earlier in another video, so I won't harp on it here, but it is good. I really like the wavy green pattern on the back. OnePlus said they were inspired by nature when designing it, whatever that means, but it does look like an ocean tide or marble finish. It's beautiful, and a lot of people go like, what kind of phone is that? And honestly, I'm kind of a hipster, and I'm into that reaction. But it is a little out there for those of you who want a little less nonsense on your phone. And there is a black option, of course. The curved screen, that's something you either love or you hate. It's a large phone, and having a curved screen does make it easier to grip, but it of course comes at a trade-off of being more fragile if you drop it on the edge, or more expensive to replace it or to have it serviced. So there are some trade-offs there. I would probably prefer a flat screen myself, but I'm not too picky about this. Some of these design choices are divisive, I recognize that, but I like it. And no matter what, the build quality on this phone is just superb. Down on the bottom, we have a dual SIM port, as well as, of course, a support for an eSIM. We have USB-C 3.2, which is capable of crazy fast data speeds, as well as video out. And then, of course, on top, we have the IR blaster. You don't see that much anymore. That is a very welcome guest at this party. And when it comes to a phone's build, what are the party fouls that we're looking for? Things that could go wrong within the first 6 months. You could have scratches on the finish, or you could have structural integrity issues where there's creaking and gaps and stuff. You could have infamous green lines running through the screen like Samsung Galaxies as well as OnePlus phones have had in the past. You could have mushy buttons, you could have port problems, you could have chipping, peeling, cracking, fading on the finish, or you could have the battery swelling. Anything else that I'm missing? I have none of these issues with this phone, and I don't baby it either, don't get me wrong. My phone is fully insured, and at the end of the day, it's a tool that will one day break or fail. But still, I have none of these issues. OnePlus did not hold back on the build quality with this phone, and I don't say that lightly. However, what isn't light is this phone. The phone is a lot heavier than I expected. On paper, it seemed reasonable, but now that I've had it for 6 months, even just holding it to send a text can sometimes, it's weighty. It's very weighty. However, this complaint is made better by using a MagSafe ring with a MagSafe compatible case. It takes a lot of the strain off of your hand and kind of relocates it into stronger portions of your hand muscles. Besides the bulk, I remain fully in love with this phone's look and feel. It's very unique, it's super sturdy, and it just feels really good to use. Nothing about it has degraded or become all that frustrating in my 6 months using it. Side note, while I do use cases, I haven't found a screen protector yet that I like. I'm still using the stock factory screen protector. You can probably see that there are some scratches from my pocket, rings and watches and all that stuff, but it has held up very well. And it doesn't inhibit the fingerprint sensor either. If you happen to have a good recommendation for a screen protector, I'm all ears, because at some point this one will get jacked up enough that I'll just peel it off, and I'd love to replace it. That said, let's look at the screen. This screen is brilliant in all kinds of ways. If you're looking to buy a phone and you have at least $700 to spend on it, no matter what, you're going to get a good display. However, there's only one phone that matched or broke 18 DisplayMate records and sits at the top of their screen quality list with an A+. The brightness, the color accuracy, and the power efficiency are leagues above anything else that OnePlus has done in the past. On top of that, I have never switched this phone off of the highest resolution and the highest refresh rate possible. Keep that fact in mind for when we talk about battery in a little bit. I also really like never having to squint at my phone in bright daylight because the screen gets so bloody bright. The fingerprint sensor has also held up very nicely too. In fact, I think it's only gotten faster through updates. If I had to complain about one thing, it's probably the auto brightness. Sometimes at night when the screen should be pretty dark on its own, having white content on the screen will actually make that auto brightness sensor trigger, and so the screen brightness will raise all on its own, and it suddenly becomes a race to manually turn down the screen brightness before I go a little blind. It's not a big deal, but it's kind of annoying. Let's talk about performance and battery. I don't game a ton on this phone, but there's literally nothing holding me back from gaming more. Call of Duty Mobile, or XCOM, or Alien Isolation, or even emulated Half-Life 2, they all run flawlessly on this phone. I haven't been able to make this phone throttle itself in any meaningful way. It doesn't heat up and it doesn't slow down. And of course that'll change eventually. I think next year's batch of gacha games will probably drag it into the land of thermal throttling. But I encourage you to take another look at the design, the build, and the price tag, and tell me this isn't secretly a gaming phone. I got the model with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the memory management is wonderful. You can see just how much shit stays open in the background. It really manages itself super well in that regard. The storage is crazy fast. The cellular and the Wi-Fi connectivity are both fantastic. I have no complaints there. Actually, I will say the Wi-Fi connectivity icon, the strength of your Wi-Fi signal, it's a little generous in how often it tells you that the signal is strong. Other phones that I've used don't have that issue. Take all of that feedback, that I'm gaming, that I have everything at max performance settings, that I use auto brightness at max resolution, that I'm flipping through apps all damn day, and that I'm driving around with Google Maps all the time, and take a guess at what my battery life should be. On every previous phone of mine, I would only ever get maybe 5 or so hours of screen on time on a good day. But on the OnePlus 12, I'm looking at 8 hours of screen on time minimum per day. I've only hit that mark a few times on my phone because frankly, I'm not on my phone for 8 hours a day because that's really bad for your eyes. But it's very easily done on this phone. For the most part, I'm extrapolating that most days I can be getting into bed and the phone is still at 60% battery and I have 4 hours of screen on time for the day. Insane. On some overnight trips, I don't even bother taking a charger. This is the first phone that I've ever had that I can confidently say has a 2-day battery life. Of course, the charging speeds are great as well. This is one of OnePlus's hallmark features. Now, let's talk cameras. There isn't so much that I can say about this phone that I haven't already gushed about in previous videos on my channel. I take aggressive amounts of photos and videos all across the world, and this is the best camera setup OnePlus has ever produced. And honestly, for the price that you're paying for this phone, it holds up really well to its competition too. Here are some of the pictures that I think show off the camera performance really well. All of these are wholly unedited. They are straight out of the camera, and I haven't made any corrections to them. And here are some videos that are also straight out of the camera.
Did a video. Just hands.
There are a couple things that I have to complain about with this phone though. For example, the microphone is not all that great. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not bad by any means, but there are much better microphones out there in cameras, and I think that if OnePlus wants to be serious about appealing to content creators, and especially in this more video-focused world, they need to up the microphone game. The other thing that I'm not crazy about is that the selfie camera is pretty weak. It doesn't offer a whole lot of detail, doesn't offer very good dynamic range, and of course it also suffers from that subpar microphone performance. There's plenty that can be done to improve a camera's performance with updates over time. However, I don't think there's a whole lot there to be improved upon. If anything, the low light performance from the camera has gotten a little better since its launch. So what's next for these cameras? You can expect hardware to continue either getting smaller or better or both. This is a pretty chonky camera module, and I'd love to see it get a little smaller in the future. But if it stays the same size and simply gets better, Cool, I'll take that as well. Also, spectral imaging sensors are probably set to come to smartphone cameras within the next year or two. I think that's going to be a huge win for white balance and clarity within pictures, and I hope that OnePlus picks that up. It seems like the kind of gimmicky little cutting edge feature that they would put in their flagship phones. Lastly, I do expect AI to take an increased role in smartphone photography and especially in OnePlus phones in the coming years. This will enable hardware to take a more diminished role, which is typically for the best. And while there will be growing pains with that, and there's going to be an interesting discussion to be had about what constitutes good photography after AI is completely integrated into the photography process, I think it will create a better point-and-shoot camera phone in the end. If there's one area that OnePlus consistently has a hard time competing on, it's probably their software. Oxygen OS doesn't tend to get worse over time, but it is a very slow series of improvements, and it seems like Oxygen OS is not a very heavily funded business unit. That said, the software experience isn't bad. It's still pretty lightweight, and so it leans a lot closer to stock Android than some other phones out there. While it lacks some of the flashy AI features that its competitors have been putting out this year, there are still several pragmatic features that set OnePlus apart. And honestly, most of them are good enough that it has kept me using the stock launcher. And that's a big deal because I'm very much a Nova Prime launcher fanboy. The home screen is pretty good and offers a decent amount of customization. Put that alongside parallel apps, Zen mode, RAM boost, the whole array of gaming features in the gaming mode. It does hold its own. It's certainly not a bad time, it's just not top of the line. There have also been a handful of features added in updates since the phone's launch. There are new, more efficient system animations. There's an AI call summarizer. I'm not sure I like that one. And there's a tool in the Photos app now called AI GC Remover, which definitely sounds like Magic Eraser if a drunk guy named it, but it works pretty well. My last phone was a Pixel 6, and to be honest, I do miss a lot of those features. Things like that passive song playing feature, call screening, being able to search the screen's content from the app switcher screen. Those are all fantastic features. And honestly, if Google managed to fit all of these specs within a Pixel phone with its software experience, and they've released it for the same price as this, I would switch tomorrow. But we all know that they won't, because Google would never stoop so low as to make an enthusiast Android phone. Those days are sadly long gone. But it's okay. Happy things come and go from your life, and all that we're left with is the time that we have and the tools that we have at our disposal. And what's a phone but a tool that you use for several hours a day? That is a lot of time to find things that annoy you. So talking about this phone in the real world, there are a lot of ways that a phone can review wonderfully and then still annoy the hell out of you after 6 months. Here are the things that I thought I would love and I ultimately ended up not caring about at all. Fast charging, first of all. So like I talked about earlier, the battery life is so incredibly good that I don't really pay attention to how fast this phone can charge. It's really cool that this can charge so quickly. There have been a handful of times where that's been actually useful to me, but because the battery life is so good, it's really not that big a deal on this phone. The other thing that I ended up not really caring about was the alert slider. It's really great in theory, and I love the haptics, but I don't use it, especially now that I have a smartwatch that discreetly handles the notifications that I actually want to be alerted of. And then there's the stuff that I didn't expect to love as much as I do now. First off, the different modes in the camera app. I'm very much like I need a photo mode, a video mode, and then a pro mode where I can change settings as much as I want. And this phone does have those, and that's great. So I didn't expect to like the movie mode and the X-Pan mode, but the movie mode, it's a very specific look, and I like it a lot. And then same thing with the X-Pan mode. It's modeled off of some old Hasselblad camera, as far as I know, and it takes some really interesting photos as well. Next, the gaming mode center. I love switching up settings on the fly to allow for more responsiveness and less interruptions and quick launch on some apps, and then easy access to an FPS counter and thermal data, all while running the game and never having to leave it. That's super nice. Lastly, the haptics on this phone are just incredible. The vibrations are so crisp and responsive. I wish that I could communicate well how the vibrations feel on this phone, but obviously I can't, so you'll have to take my word for it. It's very much an evolution over the vibration motors of old. I don't think it's a very vital feature, but it definitely makes the whole thing feel a lot more premium. And then there's the stuff that annoys me. The weight. This phone is heavy. It's heavier than most phones pounds. It's heavier than some of its competition, and it's just not something that I expected to bother my hand as much as it does. Next, the lack of full waterproof rating. I'm not brave enough to test the IP65 dust and water resistance, but my last several phones have been IP68 waterproof, and not having that on this phone kind of makes me anxious when I'm around pools or I'm in rainstorms or something. Lastly, the update schedule on this phone. I don't mind waiting a while for a given update, but the global rollout of updates is really inconsistent. Why can't we all get updates at the same time, or at least in the same week? I'm sure there's a lot of politics and regulations that go into those decisions, but it is a little obnoxious, especially when you can see iPhones get consistent, well-communicated updates. Now, I want to talk briefly about what's next for OnePlus. There are some neat ways that OnePlus could improve in the future, alongside some of the camera upgrades that I mentioned earlier. First, the Ace 3 Pro launched this month, and it contains OnePlus's new Glacier battery, which is highly likely to make it to the OnePlus 13. It's 6,100 milliamp hours in a smaller footprint than a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, due to silicon carbon anode technology, whatever that means, while also maintaining the 100-watt fast charging and having a theoretically longer battery life health. They call it the battery life killer in their presentation, which that doesn't sound like a good thing to me, but marketing is going to do whatever they think sounds good. Next, like I mentioned, I really want them to boost the waterproof rating to IP68. That said, it's already rumored or leaked that the OnePlus 13 will have an IP69 waterproof and dustproof rating. What's the difference, you ask, between IP68 and IP69? Besides being extra nice, IP69 lets the device withstand water pressure jets. So cool, I guess I can take my phone through the car wash. Next, I would really love to see a flat screen and a smaller body. I think both of these are probably wishful thinking. I would much rather the device simply be smaller and lighter with a flat screen, which is much easier to repair, but I think that's a long shot. In fact, leaks have already shown that there's likely to be what they call a quad curved screen on the OnePlus 13, which means that it's probably going to have curves along the edges as well as the top and bottom, so it'll be an extra curvy phone. I'm not sure what the benefit there is besides maybe it looks kind of neat, but you know, we'll see. Oh, and lastly, I think I'd love to see an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor. This fingerprint sensor is good, don't get me wrong. It's way better than the Pixel 6, which was a low bar, but it could be faster and it could be more consistent, and it could work a little better if your hands are sweaty or wet for whatever reason. Sometimes it misses. What was the question at the beginning? Why am I even here? Oh, is it worth it? Is this phone worth it? Is it worth your time? Is it worth your money? In summer of 2024, 6 months after its release, I think the answer is yes. Here's why. There are so many things that can go wrong with a phone after launch, or perhaps most importantly, something that's a way better deal can come along. But the OnePlus 12 is still undefeated this summer in terms of value. For $899, you get the top spec configuration of this phone, and there are frequent discounts as well. The S24 Ultra maxes out at 12 gigabytes of RAM, and it's still an extra $500 for the same amount of storage as this phone. The Pixel 8 Pro has a killer camera, but only if you're okay with weaker specs, worse battery life, and a higher price tag. Weirdly, the Motorola Edge Plus might be the strongest competitor for this phone on paper in terms of price, but I would encourage you to watch reviews of the phone's user experience before laying out any cash for it. And obviously, the OnePlus 12R is a strong alternative to the OnePlus 12. For $200 to $300 less than the OnePlus 12, there are relatively few trade-offs, and it's honestly a really good value. I don't regret this purchase at all, and I think the only thing that could pull me away from this phone is the possibility of OnePlus next year hitting it out of the park with their 2025 models. That said, let me end with some creative fodder for myself in case I need to pull it out in the next 6 months. This phone is basically perfect. What could possibly go wrong? I like it, it's fine. I'll see you in the next one.